episode 9 here. And this podcast slash live stream hopefully makes you feel like you're either on a farm or on your own homestead, or just gives you faint memories of the good simple times. But today I wanted to kind of do maybe a little bit of a brief, maybe shorter episode. We're dealing with nature out here. All these lives and slash podcasts are always done outside, so you're always going to hear nature, the whispering winds, and we're always going to occasionally have to deal with the weather out here. But today we're going to be talking about the succession of ecosystems. And so when we're looking at what is the succession, or what is the plant succession, or how does the evolution of ecosystems work, but I guess more importantly, just to start off with, what is the succession? And when we're looking at ecosystems, especially wherever we are on our own landscape, these ecosystems, they obviously took time for building up and to reach the point at what you see today even. And so we're witnessing, just in our brief lifetimes here, this little section or window of succession, which, when we're kind of looking at things more specifically, there's primary succession and then secondary succession. So I'll just kind of give an explanation there. So primary succession is actually, we're looking at what's going on Broken Bolt Ranch. Appreciate you joining. But when we're looking at primary succession, this is the beginning succession. So this is more so looking at prehistoric times, volcanic activity. So we're looking at kind of the beginnings after major volcanic activity has happened, or the glacier, the receding, I guess, of glaciers. So I understand the video might be a little bit blurry for people, but if you can kind of see, we've got some nice clouds. We've actually been getting moisture kind of on and off the last few weeks. So the climate is definitely one thing I'll say. This is part of the succession, is just the different weather patterns that we experience. So let me jump kind of back. So primary succession, we're looking at, after, I guess, we can do northern Arizona for an example more so, because we can see a lot of the ancient volcanoes that are here, but also there are still actual active volcanoes. I think in the Flagstaff area, there's a few of them up there. But we're looking at, so after that volcanic activity has happened, it's spewed all of its lava, and it's pretty much, devastated the area, if there was anything to begin with. But after that, we're actually looking at, things moving into the space after the activity has kind of died down. So we're really looking at the biology as kind of the first part of the succession here. And this kind of covers primary and secondary. The difference being with primary is just more related to after, a huge volcanic event, or kind of, the receding of the glaciers and stuff like that, after an ice age, I guess, so to speak. And then secondary succession is when we're looking at more of things have already developed, but now things are kind of developing further in some instances, but also the secondary just more relates to disruptions in the ecosystem. So we're looking at, like hurricanes, when we're looking at a lot of these fires, anything like that, major erosion and stuff like that, devastation to the already cultivated area, you could think. So what we're all more so experiencing here is primary succession right now, because things have already developed. So, the volcanoes have already long erupted in a lot of different places. Some places, yeah, it's still active. So that's just kind of part of the succession. But also there's just these different, just all these different microclimates, but also climate events, things that are going on with the climate, the atmosphere, the jet stream, snow and rain amounts, all that good stuff. And so that's where, kind of, I think why I wanted to really talk about the succession really is because I think there is a fair amount of people you could think that have different ideas about our landscape and what's going on here, and even just in the general area. And I think that's what looking at just plant succession, primary or secondary succession in just the terms and kind of the definitions even, we're looking at our area in this secondary succession, but we're also looking at it because we do have all of these trees everywhere. This is a part of the succession. And granted, we can look historically at how things have developed here over time, and what things are native, invasive, and all that stuff. But I think when it's just looked at kind of more neutrally in that sense, that this is just a stage in that where everything's at, the ecosystem, the climate, all of that stuff. So even looking at things historically, that's kind of the issue we're going to run into, at least in my opinion, is that historically we can look at areas and they had certain things going on, things, different grasses, trees, depending on the area, stuff like that. But realistically, I think looking at our time now, we are looking at a time of a different climate. We're looking at different extremes, ups and downs of temperature. We're looking at more intense storms that are bringing more, or sometimes even less, I guess, in that instance. But then we're also looking at extended drought periods of no rain at all, just looking at certain areas in the US. But all of this stuff is a part of the succession of, how the planet is trying to balance itself out, how the nature is trying to balance itself out. And that's, I think, one thing, especially with our location, our property, is that, we're in this middle portion of the succession of, developing into a healthy forest system. And I mean, that's the thing, Friction Hitch. Yeah, I mean, this succession, this is hundreds of years that all of this stuff takes. And we really can see in our trees even that we have a lot of the junipers that we have, all of these, especially the bigger ones, those huge old growth, we're looking at hundreds of multi-centuries, hundreds of years of growth, of development, of acclimation, of evolution. I think I already said development, but of evolution. And that we're coming into this in, the middle of this succession. And especially too, it's kind of a partial midway succession, just looking at, what is growing, what has gone on in the area, probably in the past. And I guess just to give kind of an example that I don't think most people know about the property, or in fact, I haven't really even explained the fact that this southern portion that is kind of behind me, the area that we've really put a lot more effort into the earthworks and the rainwater harvesting designs and stuff like that. This area, has been affected by a fire. And that was a long time ago. We're probably looking at almost 100 years ago, potentially, that a fire had happened here. And that's in this whole, main southern portion section that we have. And that's kind of, with what I've said with kind of, what's the difference between our north side and our south side. And granted, it is that northern microclimate versus the southern microclimate, but we're still looking at, up here, it's still fairly flat. There's really not so much of this huge crown and not so much of this, major divide you could think of the north and the southern portion of our property. So that's kind of the thing. And also the evidence we see, along some of these certain portions of our southern edge that have the abundance of grass and long grass and stuff growing. And that's near rocks and all that stuff. But that's just kind of the thing that we're coming into, is that what I've kind of dialed in more so is I think that because of the fire that has happened in the past, it only affected so much, a lot of our southern portion of our property here, because that's one thing I haven't shown is the evidence that we have had a fire, and we do have a lot of burnt trees in this area. So there's a lot of older stumps. There's a lot of actually like still whole trees. They just look like they dried out, like they should be chopped down and dried out, but it's like they're all burnt to a crisp, but still standing. And so that right there, for me, it definitely could imply that our whole southern portion, we got a lot, a lot of the vegetation was definitely decimated because of that fire. And then when we're adding in like the monsoon season rains, and then overgrazing, or just more intense conditions, a lot of the shade was lost when we're thinking about all the burnt trees that we had. But then now all of this area is opened up. So then when the monsoon rain, those clouds and thunderstorms come, these are the areas that I've found from the last couple years even, these are the areas that flood out the most, that get the most sheet flow. All these areas that have the least amount of coverage. And it's more evident when we're looking on our northern portion, because that has more of the rock mulch and the tree coverage. We're seeing a lot more grass, taller grass that grows, and a bit more diversity in the vegetation. So that's kind of the example that we can really look at for ourselves in our own property, at least, that potentially this whole front area used to look exactly similar to our northern portion. And looking at our map, even, it's, we have like this nice little ring of all of this bare area that's behind us, our southern portion. But then as you kind of travel farther, it gets more dense. So, and looking at the fire aspect, that's kind of one thing, everything being burned down, and you'd think it'd provide fertilizer, and there should be a lot more grass maybe growing over here. And I think that's where being the detective, looking at a lot of the evidence that we have, and it seems pretty clear to me that what we really need is the coverage here. I mean, that's what's really missing out of the picture. A lot of stuff has blown away, erosion has happened, the loss of coverage from the fire, resulting in the loss of better coverage on the grass, which equated to more of the wind and the monsoon rain, the monsoon season coming in, being able to blow more of the topsoil, more of the seed away. All of the rain, the intense rain that comes down, just washes these areas out. So it makes it harder for anything to actually germinate and take hold right away, unless it's got a really quick root system. But then we're also adding in, the grazing patterns of the animals out here, and, the stuff that we do have. I think that's part of just the symptom of that we're missing a lot of the wildlife that used to be in this area. And we've found arrowheads and stuff over here. We've found a fair amount of good pieces, just to kind of give us an indication that there probably was hunting going on around here. And just thinking in that aspect, we can question, well, how much more abundant was it before, settlers and the pioneers kind of came over here and started disrupting things, I guess, to put it lightly. So, I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at, is a lot of things that are missing out of the equation of what this ecosystem even used to be. And so antelope, the muley deer, possibly elk, foxes, more bird life. So, and then, I mean, these are all factors in the succession of things. Oh, I'm glad the video is clear today. Yeah, I never know, because it comes clear on my phone, obviously, but I never know until I watch the live stream later, and then it's like, oh, it was blurry. So forgive me. This is what happens when we do lives out on the land without Starlink or any special modifications. This is just purely phone service. So I appreciate everyone's patience. And I guess that's even the other thing. It's kind of nice in the sense, I'm not doing there's no B-roll in this. This is just me talking and kind of spitting some stuff out. So most people, hopefully, you can kind of just sit back and relax, or just be able to do stuff while you're listening and while you're kind of hanging out here. So I appreciate everyone hanging out and just, just treating it like it's just another nice Sunday hanging out on the land. So I didn't know if anyone had any questions, but I appreciate everyone joining. Christy Pasillo, yeah, hello from Virginia. Yeah, greetings. Hello from Northern Arizona. Nomadic idea. Yep. Yeah, hoping it rains. We'll see in the next coming days. I mean, we've got all this weekend, and the weather I think is saying till Tuesday, something like that. So stoked to see clouds over you. Yeah, I mean, here's hoping to, fingers crossed. I mean, they're saying above average for the monsoon rain at least. So we'll kind of see if we do get, a lot more moisture this year. But I guess even this is a little bit anecdotal evidence, I guess, maybe, or just kind of almost makes me feel good, like things have progressed here, because where I'm at right now, even our southern portion, this year is way different. There seems to be the abundance of weeds and a lot more leafy stuff, as well as I think there's a lot more little grass spots. So there's more grass actually that's freshly popping up. And this wasn't grass that I planted, none of the weeds or anything I planted. Maybe some of it came from the hay or the straw, from the goats and rotating. They're actually just a little ways over that way. So we're actually kind of making round 2 on this whole southern portion. So where I'm at, the goats have already been since last year. And so now they're going to be able to make the second run over this area again. And so, I mean, just what I'm seeing even on the land, I'm kind of hesitant because I'm afraid if I move the phone, then it's like, then you lose the service. Then it's going to be all blurry for everybody. So I'll have a video more detailed on that. We'll actually get some good B-roll. We'll get up close and we'll kind of, I'll talk a little bit about what I'm seeing here. But that, I mean, if it's anecdotal or if it's, if it actually is because of the things that we have done so far, I mean, we're seeing a lot more growth of leafy stuff, of green, of weeds, and I guess that can kind of bring me back to the succession of things. When we're looking at bare ground, rocks and stuff like that, this is a part of more so the primary succession, thinking of the complete devastation with volcanoes and fires and more so earthquake, volcanoes and stuff like that, glacier receding. But fires and stuff, that's a little more secondary. But that's what I'm seeing the beginning. So the beginning succession is we're going to see weeds. We're going to see things that we think are, invasive, so to speak, depending on the species and the management that might be entail with that. So I'm kind of kneeling in this spot here a little bit. But what we're seeing is, we'll see kind of year to year. We'll see, next year how different things are, if there is more or if there's less or if there's the same amount. And I think that's kind of the cool thing, even still, is the more plants we see, the better. That's more organic material getting into the ground. But it's also part of the succession, which I've already said plenty of times, but it's also when we're looking at soil health, most of the time when we're looking at weeds and stuff like that, we're really looking at the symptoms of a sick soil. When we're looking at bare ground, we're looking at symptoms of, what there's something missing in this equation that is causing, the results, what we're seeing here. And Ray Archuleta and Gabe Brown, if anyone recognizes those names, those guys are really big advocates about the no-till, the cover crops and stuff like that. And it's, Ray Archuleta is really kind of the main guy that really talks about the sickness, how sick a soil is. When you see those farm fields that have bare ground, nothing on them, you can kind of see that heat wave coming off them. That is a sick, thirsty, hungry, dying soil, so to speak. And so when we're looking at how things start out after, reclaiming that kind of land, like the farmland kind of thing. So this is like in Montana, how things happened for us even. Everything started with what they were growing before, which was the winter wheat. So all of that was dry farmed. They weren't irrigating that or anything. Um, and after we took it over the first year, yeah, there was the leftover wheat, but it was more so the stalks. So the goats were really stomping in more so a lot of those roots that it had, but also the stock and the organic material that was left over. By the next year, we had the abundance of weeds growing. There were so many different kinds of weeds. It was pretty crazy. But at the same time, there wasn't 100% coverage. There really wasn't. I mean, there was maybe 40% coverage of these weeds and just sparse little bits of grass, and then bits of the wheat, of the seed that germinated from the previous year. But then by year two, we started seeing a lot more diversity with the weeds, and we started seeing less of certain kinds of weeds. Other weeds did pop up, which was interesting, that didn't come up before, but those ones came up. And then what was it? Then it was there was a bit more grass that actually started coming up on year two. But then by year three, we really had eliminated a lot of the weeds. There was really, compared to the grass and the native different kind of shrubs and stuff that were going on, it was a lot more diverse than the stuff that the natural stuff on the other side of the fence, basically. So there was a lot more diversity that came about. I'm sure plenty of seed that was coming from the hay and the straw we were feeding, but also just all the nutrients that were being put in by the manure. Everything was getting packed in, and being restored, I guess, so to speak. So that's kind of, I guess, in my thinking, the earthworks we've done, stopping more of the water. We've already gotten a good one round at least so far with the goats on a lot of this bare area. Now we're going into season 2 or round 2 of rotating the goats. And so we're really seeing, I think, this could be anecdotal, like I said, but I think, we're seeing the beginning of that succession. We're starting to see the weeds grow, which the weeds don't need any nutrients. They hardly need any water. There's the expression, how things grow like weeds. There's a reason for those weeds, because a lot of those different weeds and vegetation, they're able to tap. Just like the dandelion, a lot of people know now more so about the dandelion, how that thing actually is pulling up different nutrients as well as minerals that are essential for building soil. And so that's the same thing that all of these weeds are doing. Everything has its place in nature. So all of these things have a function. Everything is playing a part in trying to create a balance in the ecosystem. That's the thing. Nature abhors a vacuum. Everything is always trying to balance itself out. So that's why we see how nature just, it's able to do things itself, for even our swales and stuff like that. Everyone's, how many people have commented about, you need to get the grasses planted, get things planted, like there's some kind of deadline. But, for being neglectful of these swales, because we're obviously building other stuff, we're busy with a whole lot of other stuff. We can only get to so much at a time here. So this is a slow project. But at the same time, all of these swales, they're all doing their own thing. And that's the whole point of permaculture, permanent culturing. So these things should be able to do their own thing when we're gone, or not, no human intervention. And we actually are seeing that with, the weeds that are starting to grow on the lower portions of the berms and inside of the ditches of the swales and stuff like that. So it's really cool to kind of see, and I think that's a little bit too what spurred the live today / podcast. Just seeing, this succession and seeing the weeds and seeing all this organic material that's starting to grow, all this carbon sequestering that these plants are contributing to, the microbial, the microbial balance that they're bringing to this soil and rebuilding it. So, that's the thing. I'm not opposed to weeds. I'm not opposed to seeing anything that's growing here, because nothing is really growing. Everyone complains about the trees a little bit, but we just to see that we've got more growing, I guess it seems very positive. a very positive sign that things are moving in a good direction. And I don't think that we're too far, from seeing a lot more success in the coming years here. So that's kind of my um, even thinking as well, because of the different practices we're doing here. I know a lot of people think it might be slow. Why aren't we planting the swales? Why aren't we planting more? You need more coverage and trees and all that stuff. And, really, we can speed up the process. That is a big factor for sure, and it's a very true factor that we can speed a whole lot of this process up. But also at the same time, we can admire how nature is able to do this thing itself. Granted, it does take a little bit longer. It does take a little bit more time, but at the same time, it just shows that nature is resilient. And if we give just at least that little bit of bump, just a little bit of help to the nature, then it does a whole lot of good stuff. And I guess that's the pretty cool part to see, and just the succession of things. So, I think the bare areas, succession wise, the bare areas, we could think, I've already said the fire evidence. So the devastation of the fire, and now, now that we're implementing a management system with the goats and stuff, we're trying to replicate somewhat what it used to be around here. There was more antelope, there was more muley deer, there was a lot more wildlife that disrupted the soil, packed stuff in, got more organic material, a lot of things that contributed. And that's what makes all of this stuff, so interconnected. Everything in nature is so interconnected. You can't take out one thing without disrupting something else, basically. And that's why, we're taking our time here. We're only really starting with trimming branches, kind of chop and drop, spreading more of the mulch outward from the trees, because obviously there's an abundance of mulch, and because it's so light and airy, it makes it hard for plants to actually start out unless the seed actually gets sunk more towards the sand that's underneath. So spreading more of this mulch out, trimming more of these trees, and then we can actually start planting more stuff, in a syntropic silviculture way, because we can use these trees to benefit the next succession of trees that we're going to be planting. And then, that's kind of the next stage of the succession of where we're at, even because we're in this in between where we have, shade intolerant plants. So when we're thinking about shade intolerant, the trees that can really handle being out in the open, they really don't need much, and that's the junipers. We're looking at the junipers, and then a little bit of the pine trees, because there's some that are just growing out in the open, but there are some that are growing underneath the junipers as well. So there's kind of the mixture, I think, of how we can kind of experiment in that way. But that's where we're seeing that succession, because looking at the example even of like Williams and Flagstaff, what is the abundance there? Obviously the ponderosas. We're not going to be growing ponderosas, I don't think, here unless we get a whole bunch more water. But when it comes to the pinyon pines, especially Williams, I guess, looking at that example, we're not that far away from them. So looking at what is in that ecosystem, we see the Gamble oaks, we see a lot more deciduous trees, but we see a lot of these trees that are all really stacked amongst each other, creating a lot of coverage, but just kind of that diverse canopy space, you could think, because the pine trees are only reaching so high up, the oak trees are only reaching so high, the shrubs and the different bushes, and then the grasses. And so that is really, when it comes to our personal property, is like everyone's going to be different. Everyone has their own opinion. I have my own opinion, and we're all going to do things to our property, and we're either going to figure it out one way or another. We're going to find out if we did something wrong or if we're on the right track. And I think that's the big thing. It doesn't really matter as long as we're on the right track. If we see evidence that we're having positive results, we can keep doing that. I think that's the one thing I don't want to try to put on people is that this is how you should do it. This is what you need to do. I've kind of said that in some of the videos, but I really don't want to present things in that way, because all these are just ideas. These are all just concepts, and they're tools. They're not, it's not the solve it answer. These are tools that we can use that enable us to fix things and problem solve and create solutions to our own landscapes, to our different ecosystems, the microclimates that we have. It's just working with the nature in that way. Nature doesn't just have one way of doing stuff, and it doesn't have just one way of creating an ecosystem. And what's super evident here is that you can go 2 miles down the road and it's almost a dead cutoff of transition from one kind of ecosystem and what it looks like to another. And so that really, there's not one answer. Everything is really, when it comes to permaculture, this is really my opinion. It's really about observation. There's no just do this, just do that. This whole game is about observation and adjusting based on our observations. So really, like, the permanence that we're creating is the concepts that are permanent, but it's the designs that we're going to continuously tweak to basically adapt to the landscape that we're creating. But then we're also going to have trial and error, because we're all human. And so that's really, what we're doing here. Even there is trial and error of some stuff, but it's more that we know a lot more of the basics and how to implement a lot of these things. And so the trial and error is more of, when it comes to the swales, some places, yeah, you can plant on top of those swales, but down here, you can't do that. Those swales dry out too much. Even if you put mulch on those, it's going to dry out too much, because it's a mound and it's exposed on both sides. There's more surface area for the heat and the wind and temperature for those mounds to dry out. And really, at least the example I'm seeing around here is how many things, trees, the shrubs, the grasses, where is a lot of that stuff growing? It's growing in dips and in little bowls where the rocks are kind of built up, in these rock pockets and stuff. It's where water is able to accumulate and gather in a larger amount, basically. So that's where, the strategies are going to be lots of divots, lots of rain garden, kind of design features. And, that's where hopefully, bringing more of the water to the plants and creating more of these divots. So the earthworks are, kind of, for us, these earthworks are going to be more of the major water stoppage, but we'll also be doing stuff in between these swales that will accommodate for, kind of like, not traditional agriculture, but it's, I guess, just kind of to give it away. It's like a couple of these gaps, I just want to do straight wheat in between, but we'll do mini swales in between each of these. So we'll have little mini swales on contour so that we have little pockets of water gathering up. And then the bigger swales are going to be the points where, the larger amounts of water can be gathered and stored and then soaked into the ground as well. And so those would be more so the tree growing systems, where we'd want to probably put more of, the water sucking trees. But I guess, that's even just another interesting aspect just in our succession, just kind of thinking about it, because there's a lot of actually these junipers that are yellowing off and dying on their own. And it is kind of interesting. I don't think it really has to do with the earthworks quite yet. I don't think things work that quick, because a lot of these have only just been done. But it is kind of interesting, a little coincidental almost, that where we do have a lot of these more dead junipers that are dying, and it's like the whole tree, it looks like a regular tree, but all the needles are yellow, and as soon as you touch it, everything just falls off. So it's like, when you have that Christmas tree into January and then you go to take it out of the house, everything just falls off. But that's the interesting thing, is seeing some of these trees that are yellowing, but they're also behind a lot of these earthworks where the water was gathering and stuff. So that's kind of an interesting aspect, just to even see that. Just that in itself, just contemplate that. It's just almost like, well, if there was the swale in front of it, why did the tree die? Wouldn't it have gotten a lot more water? So why did it die? The argument also could be, you cut off the roots when you dug the pit right in front of it, probably. So you could have disrupted it that way. So, but at the same time, I'm seeing some of these trees that are not next to earthworks, that are on their own, that are, I don't think even some of them are where the goats have been, but that's where I think it's not the earthworks. I don't think it's entirely what we've done here, maybe. So at least, so far, and not that quick. It seems a little too quick to me. But yeah, there's these dying junipers, and I know Ash Fork, northern Ash Fork, over towards Seligman and stuff. Yeah, there's been a lot of more kind of this, not studies, but they've noticed this increase of juniper die-off. And I think that kind of just, also is, when you think about it, this is a part of the succession. We can see older trees that weren't burnt, but then but they just seem like they just kind of keeled over in a sense. And then in its place, we see most of the time that there's a pine tree, or we have, a giant desert willow or something like that. So this is the succession. This is what we see, in our short little lifespan. We just get to see little snippets of, the change and the evolution of our landscapes and the surrounding nature and stuff like that. But that's really what we're a part of. We're a part of this succession, us humans as well, the becoming and passing, and witnessing at least a little glimpse of the becoming and passing of, our little pieces of land and stuff like that. So, I just think succession is really important to look at, because it helps in the investigation process. All of this permaculture, this is all investigative. It's really finding out, what's going on here, what are the conditions, what's made this place what it is, and then, what are some of the remedies that we could do, what are these practices we could do to help, restore what once was here. And we can pretty much simulate what was, I guess, going on back then at the same time. But we're also creating a diversity, because there's it's obviously different climate, different conditions, and things are going to change as well into the future. And that's something that we're not going to entirely know what is going to come. But it is, I think, just preparing in that sense, because things have obviously changed to a point where we need to do these earthworks. Nature is not working in the same works and fashion as it used to. And so that's why I said need, but this is why I think it's highly advisable that, doing all these earthworks and these rainwater harvesting techniques and practices and stuff, because everything has changed so much, and obviously things aren't the way that they used to be, even though we think, everything's doing the same thing, isn't it? And well, there's a lot more variables to that. There's a lot more variables than just blaming, species of trees, or blaming, invasive shrubs, or, certain plants. Really any of that, because nature just does nature. All of this is an experiment for nature, really, at least in my mind and in my opinion, because it's not like nature planned out where that tree is going to go, or where that tree or where that grass is going to come up. Everything just came up because the conditions were just right for it to come up right there. Everything played out in, the symphony just right for that grass to pop up. The seed had to be planted just right. It had to get just the right amount of moisture. It had to evade getting dug up by, bugs and birds and stuff like that. So, all the factors that we've got, the different variables that play into how a landscape is built up. So I know there's some people in the comments, so I've been just talking, jib-jabbing a little bit. It's getting a little bit windier. I luckily got a nice new little umbrella. So now I can put the umbrella over the phone and then I can keep my microphone dry at least, and then I can keep the phone at least a little dry. So it'll be nice for the monsoon season. Yeah, sorry, I've kind of skipped a lot of what people have said here. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, planting trees is on the list. We've got more earthworks to design as well as kind of experiment with, but then also, places for trees. And, we're really right now, the focus, besides, the succession of plants and stuff like that, what we're really also looking at, because we're taking a lot more of the permaculture approach here. So when we're looking at zones, that's the big thing as well, that plays a huge part in the decisions of what we're doing around here. Because if we're going to go around, if we went to try to plant all of these swales with, trees and stuff like that, that all of a sudden becomes a huge responsibility. That's so much to take on. That's so much more to maintenance. And then on top of it's outside it's a little ways from the Gabion, so from the greenhouse and stuff. So when we're thinking about, permaculture zoning, that really dives into, that's personal preference, because that kind of goes into your areas of convenience, so to speak. So that's where in our zone 1, we've got the Gabion, but then in the radius of the Gabion Wallapini, that's where we're mainly going to be doing a lot more of our food forest, our food production, because it's closer. And we want to be able to gather all of the goods and the fruits of our labor and get it inside of the Gabion as soon as possible. But then it's also, those are going to be using the most amount of water. So when I don't want to be dragging water way out here, I don't really want to be dragging, drip line even all the way out here until we are ready, actually. That's kind of the one thing. It's stages at a time. So that's why it's like we haven't done anything with the earthworks farther out and stuff like that. Not much has been done. I still want to finalize a lot of them, like clean them up, rake them, and then kind of spread more mulch and compost and stuff like that. So they're only just being neglected, and it's more so just knowing that nature does its own thing. Nature will do it. Nature will reestablish weeds and grasses all inside of these, and it'll just be the convenience for us when we get to them, that they'll have organic material, they'll have roots that are mingled in the soil, biology will be more active. So the planting will actually probably be more in our benefit, and we won't necessarily have to do a whole lot more extra stuff, I guess, so to speak. So everyone's different. Everyone does their land differently, and this is just the approach we're taking, partially because we also want to have a life and be able to kind of just do whatever and not always have to think about, I got to work on this and work on that. So but it's keeping things fun, but then also there's the order of things, and we're building up our zone 1. So we've got the biogas. I've got some of the wood pieces. I need to actually make the form so that I can get ready to do the greenhouse on the front of the Gabion Wallapini. So that'll be that second greenhouse. So that'll make that double greenhouse Earthship inspired Gabion. But that's where the next video I'm working on for next weekend, that'll be about the plants that we're cultivating, the easy plants, because it's a mix of, I like doing a lot of cuttings, so hardwood and softwood cuttings. Not sure if I'm going to include about the grafting quite yet. That might be in the next video. That's a little more advanced stuff. We're going to be getting into some advanced stuff here. That's the cool part. I've bought some plants, a few trees to start out with, and then we've just got a bunch of stuff started. I've also got a bunch of tree cuttings and whatnot. So I'll save that for next weekend. I think this rain cloud's actually about to come above me, so I'm gonna hustle inside. I really appreciate everyone joining the live stream podcast today. Appreciate your patience. Thanks for watching the episodes. And I really appreciate everyone's input as well as your suggestions, as helpful and critical as they might be sometimes. But yeah, I've got a few other videos in the works, and so look forward to those. Otherwise, hope everyone has a really good weekend, rest of your weekend at least, and hopefully some good moisture for everybody. Keep everything growing on. All right, peace out, everybody.